This is Gareth Aden. It's May 11, 2017. I'm here on behalf of the Nashville Bar Association's Historical Committee and its Oral History Project. Today it's my great pleasure to be interviewing one of the deans and true old-timers of the Nashville Bar Association, Wayne Leroy. Wayne, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Gary.
Would you mind giving us, to begin with, your full name and your birth date?
William Wayne Leroy, born July 18th, 1931, in a little community called Sodom, close to Bridgeport, Alabama.
Tell me a little bit about how long you stayed in Sodom and then where you grew up.
I was in Sodom less than 2 years, and we moved to Tennessee, where I've been a resident ever since.
What part of Tennessee?
Close to Jasper, Tennessee, in a little community known as Browder Switch.
How many families were living in Browder Switch?
There were about 7 farm families. We lived on the main highway, and the Browder Switch Road, there was 7 farm families that lived back in that area.
Tell me a little bit about your parents, your mom and your dad, what their names were and where they were from.
My dad was John Daly, that's D-A-L-Y, Leroy. My mother, Emily Cookston Leroy, no middle name. Dad was 86 when he died, and mother was 81. There was 13 children born to the Union. 11 of them grew to maturity, and they were not Catholic, they were passionate Protestants.
Where were you amongst the boys and the girls of the family?
There were 6 girls and 5 boys. I was the youngest boy, and I had 3 sisters that was younger than I am.
You mentioned that your dad was primarily a farmer. What type of farming and what other things did he do?
Well, we raised cotton, tobacco. We were self-sufficient as to everyday food off the farm. My dad had some mechanical ability, and from time to time when some of the, we had one international dealer there in Jasper, and he would call Dad to come and help put the equipment together.
How about your mom? Tell us about her.
Full-time housewife with 11 children, and you know.
She had her hands full.
Absolutely.
Now, Wayne, I want to ask you a few questions about your early years there in Browder Switch. And one question is this: did you have electricity in Browder Switch?
We lived on the main highway. At that time, it was 41, 64, and 72. That would be U.S. in front of it. And the Browder Switch Lane, our house was in the corner. Browder Switch Lane went up over the hill. But the families that lived behind us didn't get electricity until after the World War II, when REA came in big time. We had the only electricity and telephone out in that Browder Switch community.
Where did you attend elementary school?
Kimball.
Gosh.
That's Kimball, Tennessee.
And how many children were at the Kimball Elementary School?
Let's see, there was 4 in the first grade. There was probably 40 students in all 8 grades.
And I think you told me that when you graduated from the 8th grade, you were the valedictorian of your class.
That's correct. That was at Jasper Elementary School.
Now, during your childhood, I believe that you had some setbacks in
Yes.
health.
When I was 3 years old, my mother was a quilter, and the quilting frames hung from the ceiling. And she went back in the kitchen to check on dinner, and I was just old enough to reach up and pull her scissors off, and it stuck in my left eye.
And have you had a substitute eye pretty much ever since then?
Yes, the first substitute eye I got was glass, and I didn't like it. One morning I took it out and threw it out in the yard, and since it was glass, it busted. And I was reprimanded, and when I got the next one, I realized that I didn't want to do that because I might get reprimanded again.
You also, I think, had a really serious bout with pneumonia.
Yes. When I was 6 years old, I had double pneumonia and pleurisy. And as a result, the doctor said, where there's life, there's hope. And he sent me to T.C. Tompkins Children's Hospital in Chattanooga. I was there about 2 months. And when I came home, they had bored holes in 2 of my ribs, and I had rubber tubes around my lungs. And I was bedfast for a little over 4 months. And I went from 65 pounds down to 30. Had to learn to walk again.
Wow. You told me a story earlier this week about something you had to do to get your lungs back to working.
Well, he started me on blowing up balloons early on, and that was the force, was to improve, get my lungs back to working. And and then once I did that, and I became an expert on blowing up balloons. And I discovered the balloons, when I was 6 years old, that would be 79 years ago, did not have the elasticity that it has now. They were rubber. So I finally figured out if I kept blowing this one balloon up and down, that I didn't have to blow so hard. And that's when they started pulling my balloons away from me and giving me new ones so I couldn't cheat.
Tell us a little bit about high school, Wayne, if you don't
High
mind.
school.
Where did you go?
I went to Marion County High School.
And you know, how many were going to Marion County?
Well, it was about probably 160 students in 4 grades.
Right. Was there a lot of attrition during
Yes.
the 4 years of high
In
school?
my freshman year, there were 49 students. And when I graduated, there were 14 of us, and 3 of those were returning veterans.
How did you do in school?
I was great in chemistry and math. English was a bad subject. My freshman year, where you have grammar, the biology teacher, Sally Smith, taught us grammar. And in my sophomore year, Charlie Forster, who was the agriculture teacher, taught us grammar. So I had really no background in grammar. Sally Smith was a great science teacher, and on one occasion, we were studying some human reproduction, and she said, "Look up there at Leroy." Said, he talk about his thoroughbred this and his thoroughbred that. Said, comes to humans, his face turns beet red. That was Sally Smith.
Wayne, if I recall correctly, that doctor that stayed and kept up with you and followed you after your real serious bout with pneumonia, he watched after you for years, didn't he?
I was 12, 13 years old when he would just call to talk to me. But he put me on a pretty tough regimen of blowing up balloons, and I started when I could walk to the kitchen, then we did not have indoor plumbing, then to the bathroom, the outdoor john, and then to the barn, and I had to make a note as to how I felt when I made these various walks. And eventually, before he quit, I was running over through Browder Switch Lane. And
Well, he obviously was dedicated to service for you, and wondered what if you wanted to mention his name.
It was a Dr. Kessler, and I don't remember his first name, but he would bring for 2 years. He brought his nurse with him, and then he would come and check my vitals and give me some encouragement.
So we've come now to about 1950, and you're graduating from your class. How many ended up finally graduating?
Of the original, there was 11 of us that
How many
graduated.
went on to college?
9 of us.
And you were one.
I was one.
How did that happen? Were your parents dead set on your going to college? Or
Well,
was it you?
My parents were dead set that we all finish high school and then go to college if we could. All of my brothers and sisters finished high school. My oldest brother went in the Navy, was in the Navy for 32 years. Next brother was in, these were in WW2.
Right.
He was involved in the nuclear thing in the desert. Came down with some rare leukemia, but he lived to be 78. My oldest brother was 96 when he died.
Wow.
And I'm the only boy remaining. I have 2 younger sisters that are still living.
How in the world did your family, or did you afford to go to the University of Tennessee?
Well, in my high school days, all males had to either belong to the 4-H club or the FFA. I chose the FFA, and you know, some of the boys in the 4-H club would use a different term rather than farmers. You know, can't tell you what it was, but when I was a senior, they did 4-H club did projects. We did livestock judging, you know, swine judging, and we had teams. And I was on the parliamentary procedure team and the dairy judging team. We won the regional and got to go to Knoxville at the University of Tennessee for the finals. And while we were there, Charlie Forster took me around and made me apply for all these part-time jobs. I had to fill out an application, and there was a $10 fee on the application. I was accepted on the spot.
Wow.
And then summer came, I graduated, and we went to Lake Winnepesaukee and Chattanooga on our graduation trip.
How did you manage to pay the tuition there at UT?
I worked. The TVA at that time, well, let me back up. I had followed the wheat harvest, came back home. I got strep throat in a little Indian reservation in North Dakota, and the guy that I worked for flew me back to Kansas in his plane and gave me a bus ticket to come back. And when I got back, it was like the middle of July, and I got a job unloading cement out of a boxcar in Jasper. One morning about 9 o'clock, one of my sisters came up and said, "They just called you from Knoxville, and if you'll be there in the morning, you have the job."
And what job was this?
Well, the Fertilizer Research Division of the TVA was at the Ag campus at that time. And it involved, they had some great big greenhouses, and they went around the state to find virgin soil, and then in the summertime we'd go dig up virgin soil. But they were testing various fertilizers, and it was very scientific, you know. Any water that we put on the pots, we had to note it. And we had to keep the weather noted, you know. And we had a still that made distilled water. And it was distilled water that was used.
So you had a job really working for TVA and the agricultural farm there at UT.
Yeah.
And where did you live?
At the farm. They furnished us a apartment in a daylight basement in one of the greenhouses. and we had a phone 24 hours a day. But when at the university, at the farm there, they closed the switchboard at 5 o'clock. So we had the only phone, and there was probably, I don't know, there's 200 or 300 students that were working out there and living out there. They had the dairy operation, they had the horticulture, you know, and they all, it was all the manual labor basically was students. So if they needed to call their girlfriend, sometimes they would have to bring us something to put in the refrigerator.
And this is the way, basically, without having a family with a lot of money, you were able to get a college education.
Right. I got $10 from home the entire time I was in college.
Wow. How did you do in school? What were you good at? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I showed up, and of course I got there in August. I was working, but when registration came around and I showed up, there was 1,200 people, and that's the most people I had seen in one room in my entire life. There was more people than came to the football game in Jasper, you know. So I was green. I gotta admit it. They appointed me a counselor, and the first question out of his mouth is, "What do you want to be or do?" And I gave him the old blank stare and said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, we will put you in unclassified." Being sort of green, I didn't understand what unclassified was until I started registering, and then I found out exactly what unclassified was. My first 2 years, I took all subjects that when I finished my sophomore year, I could go any way I wanted to go, including pre-med.
Well, the long and the short of that is you really got a liberal arts education for the first 2 years.
Yes, I got a broad education. I took all the math, the sciences, you know, and I took foreign language.
When you got through, Wayne, with those first 2 years, when you had to sign up for something, what did you sign up for?
I first started out, I thought I wanted to be an accountant. And the third quarter in my junior year of accounting was branch and home office. The balance, when I was doing the balance sheet, I came up 10 cents short. And I spent hours. I never found the 10 cents until I scotch taped it to the and turned it in, and the professor said, "Just for doing all this work, I'll give you a C."
Let me guess, that was the end of accounting.
That was the end of accounting.
What was next?
I went into industrial business, and I was there just 1 quarter, and then I moved over to journalism.
Well, that means that I guess you worked for the UT newspaper too, and wrote.
Yes, when we were juniors or seniors, we were the authors and the writers for the Orange and White, which was the school newspaper at that time.
You didn't get in any trouble, did you?
Yes, almost got dismissed from the University of Tennessee. We were sitting around one evening or night. There was 5 or 6 of us having a beer or two, and we were thinking up odd things. Halloween was odd and weird, not orange and white. And we were thinking up funny things and weird things to put in the paper. And so somebody had the News Sentinel, one of the Knoxville papers, and there was an article that they had, UT had hired a new women's wrestling coach. And somebody came up with an idea, you know, and we worked on it, and eventually the article was really good till we got down to his experience. And for that we put, he got all of his experience in the back seat of a 1951 Chevrolet. All students thought it was great. The administration took a dim view and threatened to expel us.
Did you have to visit the president?
Well, we had to apologize and get down on our knees and beg. But they finally relented, and with the promise that we would no longer write articles for the odd and weird, we were allowed to finish our education.
Let's forward now to about 1955, and I believe young Wayne Leroy graduated from UT.
Yes.
What did you decide to do?
Well, I went down to Chattanooga and applied for a job. I thought I had a good journalism education, and all of my grades in college had been great on my writing and my contents, and so I go down and I apply, and they had an opening for a sports writer, and I thought, this is for me. Well, my title was Tri-State Sports Reporter. It turns out that the only thing I was to do was to get the scores from local high schools and give them to the man who really wrote the articles, and the pay was $35 a week. So I was young, still drinking beer and dating, and that didn't seem to work. So I quit that and started selling medicine.
What kind of medicine?
Well, it was Chattanooga Medicine Company, which is patent medicine. Some things you may recognize, black draught, that sort of medication. And then they had another company that they owned that was prescription drugs. So I peddled both of them for probably a year.
What happened?
Well, a girl that I'd been dating at UT called me, and at that time I was a fill-in, and they would call me either on Friday or Saturday morning to tell me where I was to be the next week. And, that was not a good idea, but when she called, my girlfriend called me and said she had tickets to the Tennessee-Alabama game, and not only that, she had reservations at the Tutwiler.
Oh, man.
And I decided, I can be 2 or 3 days late getting up to Kentucky. So I said, I'll be there. And during the game, I happened to look back, and lo and behold, there sat the vice president of the company.
Oh, no.
So I didn't even hesitate. When I got back, I got my car, went and got my samples, drove up and turned in my samples on Monday, and called another old buddy from UT who was between jobs, and we decided to go to Florida, and we did. And when we ran out of money, we were in Jacksonville, Florida. And he had a brother that lived there, and we called him, and he took us in for the weekend, but let us know that was it. So we were looking at the Sunday paper, and lo and behold, there was an ad for adjusters, Crawford and Company, starting you out at $300 a month. And we applied, and we were both hired.
And that turned out to be a very important hiring.
Yes, it did. I was in Chattanooga handling all kinds of casualty claims, and I realized that if I was going to move up with Crawford and Company, I'd have to transfer every time they asked me. So I was offered a job with American Casualty Company in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I took it, and I've been in Nashville, Tennessee ever since.
When was it that you came to Nashville, Wayne?
1958, 59.
That's about what I figured.
Yeah. Time sort of leaves you.
Now, adjusting claims in Nashville, did you have a girlfriend, or did you meet someone here?
No. A girl that I dated on and off for 5 years was teaching school at Cumberland High School in Bordeaux. And we met up and started dating again, and then in July of 1960, we were married.
And who was this lucky gal?
Carolyn McCoy.
And I believe you and Carolyn are still happily married.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Sometimes we don't know each other, but we're still happy.
Wayne, working for American Casualty, how long did that last, and sort of what was the next move in your career?
Well, I started to night law school in probably 1961, but I remained with the company until I finished night law school, and for about 4 months after I finished night law school and passed the bar. So I was there about 6 years.
What sort of put the idea in your mind that while you were working every day on claims adjusting, to go to the YMCA night law school?
Well, Earl Porter, who I was his supervisor, went, and he, after a year, I decided, you know, that I wasn't going to move up any further in the company, that I was going to pretty well be locked down. So I decided, I knew a lot about law. For 6 years, I had dealt with lawyers, and I started the night law school.
Who were some of the lawyers that you already knew, Wayne?
Oh, in Nashville, Johnny Connors, my mind's going blank.
Did you know R.B. Parker?
Oh yeah, R.B. Parker, Manier White, Couch and Harrod, and then I knew a lot of them that I just had one file with. But then there again, I traveled the whole state.
Tell us a little bit about what the YMCA night law school was like there in the
You know,
60s.
It was, I had trouble the first year getting used to studying again, you know. And once I got past that, I made relatively good grades. I finished third in the class.
How many roughly were in your class at that time?
Well, to start with, there were 60. And we finished with 12 or 13.
Take a minute and tell us about any lawyers or teachers that really influenced your either law school or your early practice.
Well, R.B. Parker was one. Down in Marion County, there was Sam Polk Ralston that I knew pretty well. He was, when he found out I was going to school, you know, he called me a couple of times, but I traveled over the state and knew a lot of lawyers, and every one of them seemed to think I was on the right course.
What about your teachers there at the law school? Anybody stand out, or any courses stand out?
Todd.
Henry Todd, Judge
Henry
Todd? How was he?
Dry.
Was he hard?
Yes, very hard. And you know, the thing that I appreciated about Todd, he was all business, you know, and he was straight up. There was no, you knew where you stood with Henry Todd, and I liked that sort of thing.
I'm guessing that he taught procedure.
Procedure, yes.
Who taught you contracts?
Dean
Lackey?
Dean Lackey.
Yeah.
J.G.
Yeah.
J.G. Lackey. We had, you know, there were some pretty good teachers. The criminal law judge, he couldn't teach, but his son came in and taught for him, and I can't think of his name now.
Yeah. I'm not sure who that would have been.
But we had some good teachers. During my time in law school, we had negotiable instruments. And during my time in law school, they passed what's known as Uniform Commercial Code. And we were told that would be on the bar exam, not negotiable instruments. And they got 2 lawyers to come in and give us a crash course.
You bet.
One of them was...
yeah, that was important.
Took the bar. It was all essay. 2 days. We had 3 questions each day at each session, and I made a mistake the first day. I went to lunch with a bunch of them, and I didn't know whether I had answered anything right or not after having listened. So after that, I did not go where there was any of the students taking the bar for lunch.
How did you find out you'd passed the bar?
Well, word got out. One of the students that graduated with us was from Pulaski, and he was running for General Sessions judge and got elected. And we heard that he had been sworn in, and we knew he had to be a lawyer to do that. So a lawyer that was representing us in Chattanooga, I called him. He knew the chief of the board examiners, and about 5 minutes later, he called me back and said, "You passed."
Well, I remember that was one of the happiest days of my life, and I'm sure it was for you.
Oh,
too.
yes. I went immediately home, and they said I would get the notice in the mail, and we sat on the front porch waiting for the mailman to come.
Wayne, who else was in your class? Anyone else that?
Well, Irving Gilcrease,
Yes.
went on to be chancellor.
Yes.
Carol Chitwood Smith was the smartest person in our class. Her dad had an office over in the Stallman building. That's the ones I remember. Well, no, Charles Bain went to work for Genesco.
Right.
Their legal department.
Right. So you graduated with Chancellor Gilcrease.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice
What
guy.
about about 1965 by now when you've passed the bar? I'm
66.
guessing. 66. Did you have any trouble moving from working as a claims adjuster into law practice?
Well, when I was in law school, T.T. McCarley, who was teaching moot court, when I finished as a senior in moot court, he called me aside and said if I passed the bar and decided to practice, he would like to talk to me. And so after I passed the bar, I had some friends who wanted me to do some work for them, and relatives. Anyway, Carol and I went back home and thought about moving back and opening up a practice in Jasper. I decided against it, and when we came back, I called Mr. McCarley, and he said, "Come down, and we will hire you." So I went down at the scheduled time. Everybody was in the conference room. The firm was known as Edwards, Schulman, McCarley, Hollins, and Pride. And we were in the conference room. I knew T.T. I knew who some of the others were, but I never had any dealings with them. But the decision had been made before I got there, I think, to hire me. And Mr. Edwards, who was not quite my age now, I don't guess, he came, and Lewis Pride met him in the hall and asked him if he wanted to meet the new lawyer in the office. And he said, "Not till I go put on my jacket." That's how far we've come.
Well, I want you to take a minute because some of those names are names that are well known in the history of the bar, and tell us about each of the partners, sort of what they were like and what type of practice they had.
At the time I started to work there, it was not a partnership. It was a loose arrangement, office sharing.
Okay.
And each, McCarley had his own secretary, Schulman had his own secretary, John Hollins and Pride, they shared a secretary, and the receptionist / bookkeeper did Mr. Edwards' work. And when I was hired, I could use any of them that wasn't working on their regular attorney's business. I got paid $300 a month, and that was for working on their cases. And I got 50% of anything that I generated. I furnished my own postage and stationery.
Wow. What was Izzy Schulman like?
Well,
and what
Mr.
kind of
Edwards
practice?
was basically retired.
That's what I kind of thought, because I followed you and I really had never known
Right.
you.
Conley was in his 80s, and he had one client left, and that was Fruoff, the trailer people.
Yes.
Schulman was strictly real estate. He was sort of the dean of real estate. T.T. McCarley was primarily a defense attorney, had Allstate and some other insurance companies. John Hollins did some defense work with T.T., also did a lot of plaintiff's work. And for, I guess, the first 2 years that I was there, John was a part-time DA. The district attorney was Shriver, and they were good friends. And he would get John sometime to come over and try cases.
Right. And at that time, they had part-time
Right.
district attorneys. What was T.T. McCarley like? Did you get a chance to try cases with him?
Yes, T.T. was he tended to maybe over-prepare a little bit, and when he got sick, he would lose his train of thought, so that he would not go to a deposition or do anything unless I was with him. And he's been in depositions and just lose his whole train of thought, But he was a Navy veteran, very good, intelligent lawyer, and I was very fond of him.
Now let's see. Did you get a chance to try any cases with John Hollins?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, you didn't do a whole lot of trying when you tried a case with John. He may lean over every once in a while and ask you a question, and but
He was in charge.
He was in charge, no question about it.
And I imagine that John Hollins is one of the more definite lawyers that you'd ever meet.
Yes, John, and of course you probably didn't know Lewis Pride. Lewis Pride, in my opinion, he and Seymour Samuels, I think, had the best legal minds that I've run into.
What type of practice did Lewis Pride have?
Lewis he and his brother Harvey were the sole heirs of a fortune in timberland in Mississippi owned by his aunts. And every time an aunt died, they inherited sizable money. So until we moved to this building, Lewis Pride would come in and with the Wall Street Journal, and he would check how his stock was doing, and then he would come back and check with me to be sure that everything I was handling was going smoothly. But when we moved up here, he started doing a lot of real estate, and he had a lot of friends over in the Bellmead area, and so he was generating a lot of business.
I forgot to ask you, and I apologize for this, but when you first joined the Edwards, Schulman, McCarley, and Pride firm, where were they? Where were they?
In the American Trust Building.
Okay.
We were on the 7th floor, and at that time, the American Trust Building had the restrooms for females on one floor, and then the next floor they'd have the male restroom. But bear in mind, Bass, Berry & Sims, Manier, all of those firms were in the American Trust Building. The carpenter firm was there.
And if you can remember, what was the year that your firm moved to the office we're in now at 501 Union?
1975.
Okay. So about 10 years of practice before you came here.
Yes.
You mentioned someone that I really didn't know very well, and that was Seymour Samuels. I certainly knew the name.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about him and what his practice was like and what he was like.
Well, Seymour was with one of the firms and had a heart attack and had to have surgery. And when he recovered, they had sort of a parting of ways. So he came over with us. Seymour was one of the drafters of the charter for the metropolitan government, and matter of fact, worked over in their legal for a while before starting to practice. Seymour Samuels had a great legal mind, and he enjoyed tough things that you couldn't get your hands on, but Seymour was great. Made the secretaries mad because he would correct their speech, and he would correct their work, and it sort of aggravated them because anyway. But I traveled with Seymour. When the butcher banks went down, we had a client that had a lot of paperwork up in East Tennessee, bonds on reclaiming strip mines and gas wells, and as a result, generated a lot of letters of credit from the butcher bank and other banks. When the butcher bank went under, the lawyers for the bank said, "We're not going to honor them." And I got Seymour, and we won those cases all over East Tennessee, Upper East Tennessee. I mean, one chancellor, when we'd go in, he'd call Seymour and me back, and he said, "Now, Mr. Samuels, I've read your document," and said, "But I'll have to listen to them other lawyers." And they were with the FDIC.
Yeah. Wayne, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about how your practice developed. What type of practice you got into and how that went.
Well, when I was hired with the understanding that to begin with, I would get closed all of the subrogation cases that had been pending, some of them for years. A couple of associates before me handled some of them, and a lot of them, they just filed them and then continued them indefinitely. So that was my first job, was to clean up all of the old existing subrogation lawsuits. And I started out 10 a week. I was setting 10. I'd write letters to the client. I'd write letters to the lawyer, if there was one, if not, to the defendant. And I was setting them and disposing of them. The majority of them did not have lawyers, so it was default judgment. But I'd been doing it for over a year, and I came with this one, wrote the lady, my client, and she responded immediately that she'd gotten my letter, and yes, she was willing to cooperate. And did she want to come up right then? And I said, no. We set a date, and she came up, and it was a nice colored lady. And she was ready to go to court. She didn't want to cause any problems. When I appeared over General Sessions, and when I walked in, there was Mr. Hooker and the other lawyer I didn't recognize, and they were talking to Judge Boone. But when we walked in, Mr. Hooker didn't holler, said, "Come on up here." So turns out they were friends, and she had called him, and he came over just to be sure that her case got handled.
How about, this was John Hooker Sr.?
John Hooker Sr., yes.
How about
And the other attorney turned out to be Connie Summers. And, you know, and we were talking about it, and he said, my client insists on being heard in court. It's the first time I'd heard that, and I didn't understand exactly what that meant until after we tried the case. And Connie and Mr. Hooker and I were talking, and he said, I told my client he could not win this case, but he wanted his day in court. And so, but I thought, you know, but then it happened to me a couple of times where
Then you understood.
Then I understood it, yes. But I did that, and then after the second year, I started helping TT. I was doing a lot of work for Lewis Pride, and just, you know, back then when I first started, we were open on Saturday. The whole firm, with the exception of Mr. Edwards, would come in every Saturday morning, and mostly the senior people would sit around and talk and drink coffee, and about noon they would go home or wherever they were going to play golf or whatever, and I was there for Saturday afternoons by myself because they didn't want a client to call and miss getting the client mad or whatever. And so for the first 2 years I was there every Saturday. And
did you ever get a golden call?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
One Saturday afternoon, this insurance company in South Carolina, the claims manager called and said he had a surety matter in Nashville, Tennessee, and needed some work immediately, and he couldn't get a hold of his regular attorneys. And I said, I'm your man, because I'd adjusted surety for about 3 years when I was adjusting claims. And I went out, and sure enough, there was the pickup truck, the keys to the office, and the pickup were in the pickup. And so they wanted me to retrieve all the financial records. Not exactly ethical or in the, I guess, the eyes of the law, but I retrieved all the financial records without any authorization. And, you know, I didn't hear from them in about 2 years. I started representing them on all their surety bond work in Tennessee.
Wow. It's one day it paid to be at the office on Saturday.
Well, you know, there were other instances. It wasn't some of the clients.
Did you obviously, Wayne, in as it was back then, tried a lot of lawsuits.
Yes, and when I first started practicing law in circuit court, a trial day was from 9 until 1. Mm-hmm. And particularly with some of the insurance clients back then, they paid you per job. Mm-hmm. You got so much for filing an answer, you got so much for whatever you were doing, you got so much for a letter, you got so much if you had to render an opinion, and the only thing you had to do was keep up with your phone calls. So, yes, I'd really love to go to court, because sometimes you get over there and 30 minutes later you're back at the office. Yep. But you got paid for a day.
Right. And you did not only tort work, but you also did surety bond work.
And fidelity bond work.
And fidelity bond, too.
Yeah.
Did you get new lawyers into the firm as you went ahead toward the 70s, late 60s?
We had some great associates. The first one was Alan Saturn, ended up being a real estate, I guess, lawyer. Carter Conway went back to Franklin, and I think is still maybe doing a little practice. We had Bob Brandt, George Payne, George Crawford, I missed one, John Gupton. We had some great associates.
Well, you passed 2 judges through your office, and Bob Brandt and George Payne.
Yep.
Right there.
And, you know, George and I are still friends, and I've run into George from time to time. I was over in the urology office, and I hear this voice said, "What are you doing over here begging for money?" And immediately it was George Payne, and I told him, I said, "This is easy picking, you know. They won't turn you down. They just reach in and give you money." Well, the nurse was just about to faint, I think, but then, you know, we shook hands and patted each other on the back, and George was quite the trickster. Loved to pull a joke.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know. He's one of my law partners and getting ready to retire.
Yep.
This year. Tell us, if you would, and I don't want to press your memory too much, but every lawyer always has 1 or 2 lawsuit cases that he loves to talk about for what could be any reason. Tell us about some of your interesting ones.
Well, from a defense standpoint, I'll never forget, Jack Norman Jr. had a case, and my defense was independent intervening cause. And Judge Swigert, or his clerk, was familiar with that particular defense. But we tried it, went to the jury. The jury came back 11 for the defendant, first one. And when Jack stood up and asked for the jury to be polled, one juror stood up and said, "I didn't agree to anything." And Judge Swigert got red in the face, and you didn't see him get red in the face much.
Right.
But he declared a mistrial and sent us home. Reset it. We tried it again, and the jury came back 11-1. We tried it the 3rd time, and the jury came back, found for the defendant. The plaintiff, his last name was Cotton. I'll never forget that man. I mean, got out in the hall, and I thought we was going to have to call the sheriff. I mean, he was just crazy. And poor Jack Norman Jr. Just kept trying to walk away from him. And then he spotted me, and he jumped on me, and I didn't do anything to him, you know, but that was from the defense standpoint. And from the plaintiff standpoint, it was a case I tried in Columbia, Tennessee. Very serious injuries. The biggest judgment that I ever got.
Was it an automobile case?
Automobile case. And unfortunately, I got a $600,000 judgment. Unfortunately, we only collected about $352,000. We got the limits. There was some other cash that the man came up with, but
well, in those days, that was a whopper.
that was a lick.
Yeah, things have changed,
Yep.
but that was a
As the old saying goes,
big recovery.
Hey, as the old saying goes, it got my wife a new car.
Tell us now about, as you move on into the 1980s, doing your work here at the office, how things changed. How did the office change very much?
Well, you know, I was the youngest person. John Hollins and I were about the same age, but Mr. Edwards died before we left American Trust Building. T.T. McCarley died, I believe, in '76. Lewis Pryor died in '78. At that time, Mr. Schulman was not really practicing much, so it left me as the only partner surviving. And so I called in all the associates, and I said, "Look, I'll make all of you partners, and I'll only guarantee you one thing. You'll get paid before I get paid." So that year was pretty tight, you know.
Yeah,
We called it the dark time.
yeah.
But other than that, we've the firm has done relatively well, even
It sure
without.
has. I mean, you've now got how many lawyers?
There's 9 lawyers
Nine
here, yeah.
lawyers now, and a lot of young,
Yeah,
new people.
They've got a good lawyers, and they claim. I called last week or 2 weeks ago, and Gary answered the phone, and I said, "Can I speak to Barbara?" And he said, he mumbled something. And I said, "Don't you recognize me?" And he said, "Not right now." So I was kidding him. I said, I woke you up, and then I realized that I hadn't been down in so long you couldn't recognize my voice.
When did you finally retire from practice?
Well, actually, I started the slow way, I guess. I started when I was 70, no more trial work. And about 75, I started taking Fridays off. A year or two later, I started taking Fridays and Mondays off. And when I finally said I've had enough, I had one client left. And we're closing her estate, I think, next week. She was a lovely lady, no relatives close, and in a weak moment, and this is something that young lawyers might think about, is in a weak moment I told her verbally that I would see to it that she was taken care of till she died. I thought she was old. She was old when she died. She was 99.
Wow.
And
wow.
You need to be careful, because I was really ready. I was retired, and I was shocked at the amount of time it required.
Right.
She was at McKendree and in the assisted living. She was worth about $5 million. It was she and her husband started way back buying nothing but tax-exempt bonds, and they never ever took any of the interest. They kept buying more.
What a story!
Bonds,
And they just saved and saved.
She worked at Bluebell and for the state of Tennessee for a while. And he was the clerk to the Senate for a good while.
Wayne, you need to take that story and tell it to all the school kids.
Well, it's and she was not frugal. I mean, her and her husband made sizable donations to Vanderbilt and to Cumberland University. But she sold her house, moved into a cottage out at McKendree, lived in it for 20 years, and she had a stroke and was in the what they call the manor, which is the not.
But all this time, all that money that they were saving was making money too.
Mm-hmm. She, for instance, like 2/3 of that was in tax. Girls that we would educate them, but we would not buy them a new car. Our oldest daughter's Emily, and she's the executive director for the Tennessee Fuel and Convenience Stores. That involves a lot of trips for educational purposes, and they have a lot of conventions, and they play golf, and our middle daughter graduated from law school at Vanderbilt, and she clerked here 2 summers. And when she graduated and passed the bar, she informed me that she was not interested in coming down here. She didn't want to work that hard. That there was such a thing as quality of life. So she went with TDEC as their lawyer representing county officials. And they operated on the University of Tennessee schedule.
And that's Ellen,
That's
correct?
Ellen, right.
All right, and then the first, if the first daughter, who's the executive director, is Emily.
Is Emily, yes.
Okay, and then that leaves Marion, I think.
Right. Marion's the youngest, and her husband is with Fruit of the Loom, and he's, I think, an executive vice president now or something. But they were living in Akron, Ohio, when she decided that she would like to go to law school. And the University of Akron, Ohio, better known as the Zippers, the tuition for law school was $3,600 a year. And she finished 2 years, and then her husband was transferred to Bowling Green. That's their home office.
Right.
And they moved to Nashville, and of course, she became a guest student at Vanderbilt. And the tuition went up. But she was down here with us for, I'm not sure, a year or two. Our oldest granddaughter was born, and she didn't want to work full time, so we didn't have any position for that. So she started working for Judge Gaydon, and when the baby was born, she worked from home. She would prepare the minute docket and do whatever research, And she's been over there now full time for, I don't know, probably 10 years. At least she's vested in the retirement. But she actually graduated from the University of Akron.
And how many grandchildren do you have?
We have 3. Ellen's son graduated from Swanee last year. Marion has 2 daughters. Caroline finished her first year at Tulane. Matter of fact, this weekend they're going down to bring her back. Kate, the youngest one, will be a freshman at Harpeth Hall next year.
Wow. Well, I'm certain that you and Carolyn have enjoyed watching them grow up.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's one of the few good things about getting older.
Right, and they go home sometimes at night. But no, all of them are great kids. All of them went to private schools. Adam was an MBA graduate. The girls are going, Kate's still at Harpeth Hall, but her sister graduated from Harpeth Hall, got an amazing scholarship at Tulane, and
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, we're kind of drawing toward a close, but I want to ask you to reminisce or ruminate a little bit. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how, over the many years that you practiced, how has practice changed? And any thoughts you have?
Well, I think the biggest change has been communication, personal communications between lawyers. When I went over to Edwards, Schulman, McCarley, Hollins, and Pride, Mr. Edwards said he wanted to talk to me when I got through in the library, and I walked back, and the first words out of that man's mouth was, if you have something important, take your hat off the peg and go see the man. It's true. But, now, and even, I can just, Isidore Schulman always had to have a court reporter to do longhand, and a secretary that could do longhand. He did not want to talk to a machine.
The personal contact.
It come down to me. When the office decided to connect all of the computers and everything, and where you could sit at home and you could do all these great things, I told them forget about me. I still had the telephone, but I think the I think the practice has become less personal because you're not having that face-to-face communication. And I'm not sure that's for the best.
Yep.
But that's the way I think that's the future that young lawyers are looking at is, now, you don't see your client in the office. You go to a little conference room. They came to my office,
Right. Sat down in your office.
Office.
Exactly.
But I think the advertising has eroded the confidence in the system. We never advertised, and I wouldn't ever hear of it. I came up, you earned your clients by your work. And but now, another thing that really bothers me, I think the legal profession is being encroached upon in many aspects. Real estate, I think eventually lawyers won't even be needed for real estate. There's just so many divorces. Now, when I started, I would take a divorce if it could pay a fee, but that was only divorce work I did. But divorces now, I understand that you can file it yourself. The clerk has forms that they'll give you if you want to file your own divorce. I just think the lawyers are slowly but surely letting encroachment come up on their kingdom. And
what advice did you give your girls when they talked to you about going to law school?
If you're going to law school and you're going to practice law, go for a specialty. And I told them, in my opinion, the best specialty was tax.
Yeah. But,
neither one of them was interested in, quote, plaintiff's work. Mm-hmm. And Ellen particularly didn't want to work hard. And the TDEC with the going on the University of Tennessee schedule, she got off about a month for Christmas, and if the metropolitan schools were closed for snow, she didn't have to work. And plus she was building up with the state, all of these days that they can accumulate, so it fit her perfectly.
Right. Well, it's interesting because that also reflects on the fact that the makeup of the bar during your lifetime has changed dramatically with women being lawyers.
Well, in my time, the only lady lawyer that I had any dealings with was primarily where she was appointed as a guardian for various people, and sometimes they had to sell real estate, and they would get lawyers to come in and represent unknown heirs and that sort of stuff. And but she did a lot of that. I can't remember her name, but now, and what bothered me most about women lawyers or the lawyers, I couldn't stand seeing them carry the big old heavy briefcases, and I wanted so badly to help them.
But they didn't want you to do that.
No, that's the only thing that bothered me was, you see them lugging those big old heavy briefcases. It never bothered me that they were practicing law, but it's, I guess, maybe 50% now.
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with it. But it's a real change from when it was a male. We didn't have any female lawyers coming to the Bar Association meetings.
Tell us these days, Wayne, now that you're pretty much fully retired, do you have any hobbies or things that you and Carolyn do that you'd want to mention?
Well, yes, I had a lot of hobbies, and when Carolyn and I got married, I fished, I hunted, I did all the things, and as the family started arriving, you had to spend some of that time with family, and I guess, you know, I used to go to South Dakota every year pheasant hunting.
Yeah.
I'd go to Mexico bird hunting, and I guess when they were in high school, a lot of that phased out because they required a lot of attention and time, and all of them took music lessons, and they started with the violin. At that time, you couldn't take 2 showers at our old house because of water pressure. So I would get up and cook breakfast, and Carolyn would help the girls, and they would take turns about practicing that violin, sitting on the steps, coming. And the youngest one, her violin was a quarter size, and you never heard such screeching in your life. I mean.
Who was the impetus for this music? Was it Carolyn?
Yeah, Carolyn.
She's
yeah.
musically
I had
inclined.
no music talent.
Yeah.
And we, you know, Ellen got to be pretty good in the junior thing, symphony. She was #1 violinist. Wow. And then she got to be 16, and there went the violin. With Marion and Emily, they parted company earlier than that with the violin.
Right.
Because, you know, I really encouraged them to have a good music talent, not to be professional, but just for their own pleasure.
And for well-rounded.
But, you know, it was interesting when we used to take them to violin camps, and it was some funny things happened at them. Because it's primarily little girls at the violin camp.
One last thing. I know that for about as long as I've known you, I think you've been faithful and leader position at St. Philip's.
Well, yes, I was raised in the Church of Christ, and when I went off to college, they were a bad influence on me. Other than going to weddings and funerals, I doubt if I attended church service the whole time I was in college. And of course, when we got married, Carolyn was a lifelong Episcopalian, and I didn't really take to it to start with, but when the oldest daughter, Emily, who was about 4 years old, got up one Sunday morning and said, "I don't know why I need to go to church. Daddy's not going." So I started, and it fit me fine, and I've been active at St. Philip's since 1966, active in the Layman Conference, president 1986.
And that's quite an honor, by the way. That's one person every year is president
Yeah.
of the Layman's Conference for the whole state.
Right.
And I wanted to bring that out.
But last year was the first year that I missed since 1969.
Well, this
Going
year,
to the Layman's Conference.
this year maybe you can make it up.
Well, I've already filled out my, but see, I was doing chemo.
Yeah.
And my friend Henry Lodge stood up and announced that, you know, he's not here because he's sick. Anyway, yeah, I could have possibly made it, but you never knew exactly what kind of reaction, you was going to have. So I forfeited my $125, but I intend to go this year, yes.
Well, I hope you can.
I
Wayne,
will.
it's been just a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. Is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't talked about?
Yes, there's one thing.
Okay.
You failed to ask me if during my practice I did something stupid that I regretted.
Well, let me ask you about that.
Well, when I was adjusting, I had this lawyer, we became good friends up in Johnson City. And during that time, And before I started practicing law, there was a big bad case up there that I had worked with him on, and so I was practicing law, and he called the company and said, "Would you please send him up here to help me?" And he was, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s, but I go up there, and in his file, on some documents, there was a stamp, a BS stamp, not BS, but spelled out. And he said, "I've had a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with it." So I thought, well, I'll have fun with it too. So I come back to Nashville, go down 2nd Avenue, and get me a BS stamp. And I was only a lawyer that I knew pretty well, that we were friends, meet at the Satsuma and that sort of stuff. And if I'd get a demand letter that I felt was unreasonable, send it back to him. Well, everything went smooth till at the case in front of Judge Miles. You probably never tried a case in front of Judge Miles.
I didn't.
Disciplinarian. And we were in the process of trying it, and he called us up for a little conference at the desk, and something came up about something was in the file. And it didn't dawn on me that I had stamped BS on 2 of the letters that I had sent back to this particular lawyer. Well, guess what? Judge Miles started thumbing through the file, and the 3rd letter he turned over, I could read it upside down in red. And he got livid with me. You talking about talking down to him. I mean, he threatened to have me disbarred.
Oh, my Lord.
But it was funny. Anyway, after the case was over, and fortunately it was a judgment for the defendant, because I just kept thinking, he's going to add to any judgment they get. He's going to blow me out of the water. Well, after the case was over and the jury was gone, he said, "I'd like to see counsel in my chambers." And I thought, oh man, you're stupid, because I'd promised I'd burn that. When the minute I got back to the office, that thing would be destroyed. It would be done, and apologize, down on your knees, And I thought, he's not through with me.
Right.
We walk in his chambers, and he was just dying laughing. He said, "That was funny but awful." And
that made you feel a little bit better,
well,
I guess.
Around the firm here,
Uh-huh.
everybody got some of them didn't even know I was doing the BS thing. But it was, and I look back on it, and I thought, man, you were stupid, But, I talked to my friend up in Johnson City. They'd been doing it up there for 20 years, and nobody had ever raised a question on it. But I used it on a lot of, I used it on a lot of demand letters.
Well, maybe we can say the times are changing. I don't know.
Yeah, yes, times are changing.
Times are changing.
But that was one mistake I probably should have avoided during my formative years.
Well, if that's the worst, I think you did very well. Thank you so much.
It's
Wayne.
great.
Thanks so
Gareth.
much. Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I'm not sure that anybody will learn anything from it, but I enjoyed it.
Well, I think they will. Thanks again.
Thank